Thanks for joining us. Hello, I'm Nari McDiarmid for Mining Journal, and I'm speaking with John Ciganek, the Managing Director and Chief Executive of South Africa-focused Vanadium Resources. Now, John, your flagship project is Steelpoortdrift, which has been described as one of the world's largest and highest grade vanadium deposits. Can you provide a bit of detail about the project and its expected scale?
Yeah, the deposit's about 680 million tonnes, so that is up there with some of the largest. Also, the grade 0.7 is probably consistent with a lot of peers in the bushfield and internationally. Our concentrate grade gets up relatively high or comparable to other bushfield projects, and our project will be developed in two phases. Stage one will be producing vanadium pentoxide flake of about 13,000 tonnes per annum. And in year 4 and 5, we would look to doubling the capacity at that point. And in terms of scale, in terms of the jurisdiction, with us being in the bushfield in South Africa, there's a long history of vanadium production expertise. So it's in the right area, right jurisdiction, and there's other companies that have been there for a long time.
John, you've recently released a definitive feasibility study into the project. What for you were the highlights of that study?
I think the fact that our DFS, just based on our first 25 years out of our 180-year mine life, gave us an NPV of about 0.9 billion for our 74% share. And low strip ratio, which is a 0.9 to 1 waste to ore, which basically contributes to us being the lowest quartile. We're using established processing methods, so there's nothing new from a banking perspective. It'll be technically banked because we can send bankers to look at other operations in the bushfield and around the world. And we've got our mining right, which is our approval to mine. And we're in the process of securing environmental authorisations, water permits, power, and that process started once we finished our DFS in October last year. So we're well underway.
Well, if we look at vanadium itself, John, traditionally its key market has been in strengthening steel. Where do you see the demand headed?
I think the steel and alloy market is still the predominant space today. So at the moment, it represents about 90% of world demand. And a lot of that is around making steel stronger and lighter. So you can build high rises because the steel is stronger to be able to cope with that. And another example is steel, vanadium alloys in Boeing air jets, for example, the 787s and A350s take about 100 tonnes of vanadium alloy in each plane. So it's this type of demand on the existing side which will continue. Well, it won't knock the lights out, but there is continued growth there. From the other aspect and the important area from my perspective is vanadium redox flow batteries is an area that's developing. There are quite a few commercial scale operations now in place, ranging from 10 megawatt up to 100 and 200 megawatt facilities being built. So there's vanadium redox flow battery capacity. There's a facility in China which is called Dalian VRFB. They commissioned in October last year 100 megawatt. That's basically a grid scale power facility. They're in process of building stage 2 up to 200. There's other operations globally that are looking to build increasingly greater scale facilities. So this is basically going to be an alternative to coal-fired and gas-fired power stations. So it'll be basically VRFB, vanadium redox flow battery, will be taking the power generated from solar facilities and wind turbines. And in particular in South Africa, there's quite a few power generators, renewable power generators in South Africa that 500 to 700 megawatts in any one particular company. So there's an opportunity to build these VRFBs attaching to that.
Well, John, that leads neatly to my next question, actually. And obviously, South Africa does have a long history of mining, and you're looking at a very long life project yourself. You mentioned 180 years earlier. What's the infrastructure like in the project area? I mean, I know South Africa's also had some power supply woes of late. Can you also elaborate on what renewable energy options you're looking into?
All right, we'll start with Eskom, the power provider in South Africa. It's relatively known in South Africa that Eskom have been not maintaining their facilities over the last 10 years. So over time, their performance has been degraded, resulting in timeouts in terms of they call it load shedding in South Africa. So for the broader South Africa, that's a common occurrence in the Bushbuild area. So there's it's a major mining hub, so it's an industrial region where there's probably 30 to 35 mining companies that are not necessarily downscaled or have their power cut off like the vast majority of South Africa. Their power generation is reduced from 100% to say 25%. So it's in Eskom and South African government's interest not to turn these facilities off. So there's some element of protection in that, but there's also, load shedding that does occur in and around that region. From a DFS perspective, we've assumed we've got two facilities. We've got the mine and the concentrator, and on a separate facility, we've got a salt roast leach site, which both consume power. And on the mine and concentrator side, we're building a solar facility, a 1 megawatt vanadium redox flow battery attaching to a 5 megawatt solar facility, and that site needs about 5 to 6. So it's not big enough to carry 100% of the load, but it's big enough to deal with any potential load shedding issues as a result of Eskom. And we're also using that as a bit of a test case. Let's see how this works, and if it's commercial and we're having continued problems with grid power, then we could go off the grid. So we are exploring that. That's work that we'll be doing in the next 6 to 12 months. On the second site, we're doing similar discussions with a group that we've acquired the land, and our neighbour, we're in discussions with them about potentially building a 35 megawatt solar facility and still a 1 megawatt VRFB potentially. But I think the key there is it's a mitigant. So I think in terms of the way that the banks will be looking at, they'll be looking at, yes, Eskom's a base, but there's solutions in place to potential counter that negativity on the power side. But notwithstanding that, we believe that Eskom are getting their house in order, and we do think longer term it will improve, but regardless, we'll have an alternative there if it eventually came to that.
Well, John, you've stepped up to the managing director role recently at quite an exciting time for the company. So what are the next steps towards development for Vanadium Resources?
Yeah, well, good question. I think right now I got appointed to the role in January, so we were in recruitment mode. So I'm basically executive number one. Executive two is the general manager of operations. He's come out of an existing vanadium operation, so he's been running concentrator and salt roast leaching processing facilities, just like what we're doing for the last 20 years. And he's operated in the bushfield for probably 40 years. So we're in the process of arranging environmental authorizations, water permits, power, project execution plans, front-end engineering, design work. So getting our house in order technically, appointing further key hires internally in terms of project management, environmental, social liaison individuals, and just basically building out a bit of mass within our technical team, but also on the corporate side. One of the key areas for me and my team here in Perth is discussions with debt financiers, off-takers, and strategic investors. We've appointed a debt advisor out of London, HCF, who has a lot of experience in funding projects in South Africa and the Africas. And we're going quite well. We're getting expressions of interest and indicative term sheets with debt and offtake and strategic investors. So a lot of things are happening, but they're all happening in parallel. We're aiming for final investment decision by the end of the year. It is a stretch target. We've got a massive task. So provided we get our house in order, technically we'll be there at the end of the year. And if we do get there by the end of the year, we'll have financing options that can do it quickly, but it will cost more. And then if we don't hit the end of the year, then we may have a bit more time to explore, some more traditional project financing approaches. But we're looking at a range of options at the moment. So from my perspective, in summary, I'm pretty excited to be here. I think the project's massive. 25 years is basically the DFS, but our project's going to be here for decades, 180 years plus. We're going to be in the right timing, with the world transitioning from fossil fuel power generation to renewables and VRFBs to provide the power. So for me, that's probably a key reason why I joined. So that's why I'm here, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, John, thanks for taking the time to have a chat today. Much appreciated.
Thank you for your time and taking this interview.